In 1872, Uriah Oblinger left his wife and child in Indiana and went west to claim what the government advertised as free land. The price at the land office was small. The real payment began afterward. He had to build a house from the prairie itself, break soil that had never met a plow, survive blizzards, drought, insects, debt, and prove that his family had truly lived there. The government offered 160 acres. What it demanded in return was 5 years of a family's life. The Homestead Act was signed by Abraham Lincoln in May of 1862, while the Civil War was still tearing the country apart. Beginning the following January, an adult citizen or an immigrant who intended to become one could enter a claim for as much as 160 acres of surveyed public land. The filing fees were modest. In the earliest years, the total federal cost was commonly $18 from first application to final patent. That number made the offer sound almost impossible to refuse. In much of the East, a hired man or tenant farmer could work his whole life without owning enough ground to support a family. Here was a path to a farm with his own name on the deed, but the application did not transfer the land. It only started a 5-year test. The claimant had to settle on the tract, build a dwelling, cultivate the soil, and remain long enough to prove that the entry was genuine. After 5 years, 2 witnesses had to appear and swear that the claimant had actually lived there and improved the property. Only then would the General Land Office issue a patent. The government was not giving away finished farms. It was handing ordinary people a square of raw country and asking them to turn it into a working farm. Uriah Wesley Oblinger understood hard work. He had grown up around farms, a grits mill, and a sawmill in Indiana. He had also survived 3 years in the Union Army. After the war, he married Martha Virginia Thomas, known as Mattie, and rented ground near her family. They had a daughter, Ella, but no farm of their own. In the fall of 1872, Uriah traveled to Fillmore County, Nebraska, with Mattie's brothers, Giles and Samuel Thomas. The country was open prairie, surveyed into square sections on paper but barely altered on the ground. Uriah selected land about 11 miles west of Geneva. His family remained in Indiana while he tried to make the claim habitable. The letters he sent home survive. They do not read like a government brochure. They read like a man measuring every board, animal, mile, and dollar against the question of whether his wife and child could safely join him. In December, he wrote that most of the nearby settlers were young families starting with almost nothing. He liked them for precisely that reason. As he put it, they would all be poor together. The land did not erase poverty, it gathered poor families in one place and gave them a chance to outwork it. Even choosing the 160 acres required knowledge the advertisement did not provide. On a survey map, one quarter section looked much like another. On the ground, a shallow draw might hold water after rain, while the next tract dried hard. A distant line of trees might mean fuel and building material, or it might belong to someone else. Soil that looked black and rich could sit too far from a reliable well. Land close to a railroad or town offered markets, but it was claimed quickly and often surrounded by speculators. The best homesteaders read more than acreage. They studied drainage, grass, slope, access to water, distance from neighbors, and whether a road could reach the place during winter. A bad choice could not be repaired by determination. 5 years on poor ground was still 5 years on poor ground. Survey stakes also imposed a new kind of order on a landscape that had never been empty or featureless to the people who already knew it. The government reduced the prairie to township, range, section, and quarter section. Uriah's claim put him near his brothers-in-law and other young settlers. He was not merely choosing soil, but he was also choosing the people most likely to help when a roof failed, a horse was injured, or a storm buried the road. Before Uriah could plant enough crops to prove anything, he needed shelter. Timber was scarce and expensive on much of the Nebraska prairie, but sod was everywhere. A sod house began with grass whose roots had knitted the topsoil into a dense mat. The builder cut that mat into long strips, divided the strips into blocks, and stacked them like heavy bricks. Uriah described walls 2.5 feet thick. He alternated layers to bind them together and raised them slowly because wet weather or freezing ground could stop the work. The result was crude, but not foolish. Thick earth walls held heat in winter and stayed cool in summer. They also brought the prairie indoors. Dirt sifted from the ceiling, roof leaked mud after hard rain. Mice, fleas, and snakes found openings unless the inside was carefully plastered. A family who had crossed hundreds of miles for land could spend its first season living inside the material it hoped eventually to plow away. This was the first hidden cost of the claim. Before the ground produced food, it had to produce a house. And the house was still unfinished when Nebraska delivered the kind of test no land office form could describe. It came in April on Easter weekend, after the calendar said winter should have been ending. The storm began in April of 1873 and continued for nearly 80 hours. Snow drove through cracks in frontier houses and erased roads, fences, and familiar landmarks. Uriah was still separated from Mattie and Ella. He was trying to protect a claim that could not protect him. A woman living about a mile away was trapped with 4 children. Her firewood was gone, and her axe had disappeared under the snow. The family had begun breaking furniture for fuel. Uriah fought his way over, found the buried axe, and cut poles from the pig pen so they could keep a fire alive. This was exceptional because the entire settlement was built on the assumption that neighbors would do this for one another. The legal claim was individual, survival was not. A quarter section contained 160 acres, but it could still leave a family dangerously alone. Firewood might be scarce, a well might fail, a horse could go lame, a woman could go into labor with no doctor nearby. The line between independence and isolation was thinner than the maps suggested. When the storm ended, Uriah was still alive, the house still stood, and the claim remained his. This counted as progress. Mattie and young Ella joined him in Nebraska in May. For the first time, the homestead became a family home instead of a construction site occupied by one exhausted man. Mattie's letters show how quickly extraordinary conditions became ordinary life. She cooked, planted a garden, tended hens, visited neighbors, watched Ella eat bread and butter, and teased Uriah when he was chosen as a local school director with a $5 salary. The sod house was not presented as a tragedy. It was their home, and she intended to improve it. Homesteaders were not simply victims of weather and bad policy. Many were capable people making a calculated gamble. They could see the hardship clearly and still believe ownership was worth it. But the labor was divided in ways the final land patent never recorded. Uriah broke Prairie, planted wheat, managed livestock, hauled supplies, and worked for cash when the farm could not provide it. Mattie turned a dirt-walled structure into a household, raised children, cooked from uncertain stores, kept a garden, cared for poultry, preserved what they could, and maintained the social ties that made an isolated claim survivable. The government asked whether a house had been built and acres cultivated. It did not ask how many hours a woman spent keeping the people inside that house alive. The same was true of community labor. Neighbors traded teams, helped raise roofs, shared seed, carried news, sat with the sick, and testified for one another at final proof. A homesteader who insisted on doing everything alone could satisfy the frontier ideal and still fail the frontier reality. Schools, churches, roads, and local government followed the claims because families built them while still proving their own land. Uriah's small position as a school director was more than a joke about $5. It showed that the settlement was becoming permanent. The government could draw a county on a map, but permanence arrived when parents decided their children needed a school. The phrase free land also concealed the cost of everything the land required. A claimant needed transportation to reach it. Then came a plow strong enough to cut prairie sod, a team to pull it, seed harness, tools, fencing, a stove, wagon, livestock, and cash for whatever could not be made or bartered. A farm could be debt-free on paper and still consume every dollar a family had. The first breaking was especially punishing. Prairie grasses had built a root layer that resisted an ordinary plow. Turning it required weight, sharp iron, animal power, and patience. The first crops planted in newly broken ground were a wager against rainfall, insects, hail, early frost, and markets the family did not control. Even a successful harvest could fail financially. Grain had to reach a buyer, often by wagon and railroad, and freight charges reduced what came home. Crop prices could fall below the cost of production. A family might raise more than it had the year before and still end the season poorer. The Homestead Act offered land, not operating capital. It transferred the risk from the government to the household. Water exposed the weakness in the bargain faster than almost anything else. A quarter section with no dependable spring or shallow groundwater could require a well dug by hand through layers of soil that might collapse before reaching water. Livestock had to drink every day. Gardens could not wait for a distant creek. A family could haul water for itself for a time, but not enough to rescue fields from drought. 160 acres also meant very different things in different climates. In humid farm country, it might support a mixed farm. Farther west, where rainfall was lower and grazing land carried fewer animals, the same legal square could be too small from the first day. Congress later created larger claims in some regions, but thousands of families learned the arithmetic before lawmakers did. Then there was the need for cash. Homesteaders often worked away from their claims as freighters, laborers, carpenters, railroad hands, teachers, or hired farm workers. Every day spent earning money elsewhere was a day the homestead was left short of labor. Every day spent on the homestead was a day without wages. The family had to balance both until the land could support itself. In the mid-1870s, that risk arrived on wings. Grasshopper swarms struck the Central Plains in numbers that frontier accounts struggled to describe. They ate wheat, corn, gardens, leaves, and sometimes cloth or wooden handles stained with salt from human hands. A field that represented months of labor could be stripped in hours. The Oblingers' correspondence records grasshopper trouble alongside drought, low prices, and ordinary financial pressure. This was a disaster that could be followed by a simple recovery. It was a chain of setbacks, each arriving before the family had accumulated enough surplus to absorb it. Congress eventually passed special relief measures that could extend deadlines in areas devastated by grasshoppers or drought. That was an admission hidden inside federal paperwork. Some families had met the spirit of the bargain and still could not meet its calendar. A homesteader could build the house, remain on the land, and labor every day, yet fail because the crop disappeared before harvest. The law rewarded improvement. Nature did not recognize improvement as a claim on anything. The bargain itself was older than the Homestead Act. Decades earlier, land companies in the Northwest Territory had also required settlers to prove permanence through visible improvement. In the story of Johnny Appleseed, we saw how orchard requirements could determine whether a claimant kept his ground. John Chapman recognized that living apple trees satisfied the rule before they produced usable fruit, and he built a business by planting ahead of settlement. The Homestead Act expanded that same basic principle across millions of acres. The government did not merely want people to occupy the West. It wanted houses, crops, fences, roads, schools, and communities that would make settlement difficult to reverse. For Johnny Appleseed, an improvement rule created an opening. For families like the Oblingers, it created a clock. At the end of the required period, survival still had to be converted into paperwork. The claimant returned to the land office with two credible witnesses. They answered questions about residence, cultivation, buildings, absences, and whether any part of the claim had been transferred improperly. The final fees were paid. The record traveled through the General Land Office, and a patent eventually established legal ownership. That process created one of the most revealing archives in American history. Every successful claim left a case file. A simple form could list a house, barn, well, fencing, acres broken, crops planted, family members present, and neighbors willing to swear that the story was true. The patent looked clean, even though the 5 years behind it were not. There was fraud throughout this process. Speculators hired phony claimants, bought abandoned entries, and exploited gaps in a law the General Land Office was too underfunded to police consistently. Investigators covered enormous territories, and some gave in to bribery. But fraud does not explain the millions who genuinely moved onto exposed ground and tried to make it hold a family. For them, the paperwork was not a loophole. It was the last obstacle between temporary possession and a permanent home. Final proof could also reveal how narrow the margin had been. Witnesses might describe only a few cultivated acres, a sod dwelling, a stable, a well, and fencing built piece by piece. Those improvements could sound modest until they were measured against the starting point. No house, no planted field, no established road, and no legal title. Failure to prove up did not always mean the claimant had been lazy or dishonest. Some families sold relinquishments to incoming settlers. Some moved when a better opportunity appeared. Some discovered that illness, pregnancy, age, or disability made the labor impossible. Others left after one crop failure because they understood that staying would consume what little capital remained. The abandoned claim was not always the story of a weak family. Sometimes it was truly the wisest decision a family could make. The law opened land ownership to people who had often been excluded from it. Immigrants who declared their intention to become citizens filed claims. Formerly enslaved men and women sought farms in their own names. Single women could qualify at 21, and widows could preserve a family's claim. That opportunity was real, so was the land's earlier history. To the government and many settlers, these tracts appeared on survey maps as public land awaiting productive use. To Native nations, much of the West was homeland, hunting country, treaty land, or territory already reduced by earlier federal pressure. The effect differed by region. In some places, dispossession had occurred before homesteading became the main settlement force. In others, especially parts of the Dakotas and Oklahoma, homestead policy directly intensified it. The honest record has to hold both truths at once. The Homestead Act gave ordinary people an extraordinary path to ownership. It also helped transform land the government had no moral right to describe as empty. Uriah was a Union veteran, and veterans could receive credit that reduced the legal residence period. But the Oblinger family remained on its Nebraska homestead for nearly 7 years. They endured blizzards, drought, grasshoppers, low prices, and the slow work of turning sod into a functioning farm. Their finances were finally beginning to improve by 1880. Then Mattie went into labor. She died from complications, and the infant son died with her. She was 36 years old, and Uriah was left with 3 daughters, the oldest only 9. The land had been improved, the family had proved its endurance, but a farm still required both field labor and household labor, and Uriah could not do both while caring for 3 young children. He sold nearly everything and left Nebraska for Minnesota. The daughters were separated among relatives until he could establish another home. This is where the phrase successful homesteader becomes inadequate. A patent could prove that a claim had succeeded under federal law. It could not prove that the household remained whole. It could not value the health spent, the children buried, the marriages strained, or the years lost to debt and isolation. It could not distinguish between a family that built a lasting farm and one that earned the deed only to discover that ownership had arrived too late. Across the life of the Homestead Act, roughly 4 million claims were filed and 270 million acres passed from the public domain into private hands. The exact success rate varies by how the records are counted, but millions of claimants did not reach a patent. They abandoned ground, changed plans, ran out of money, lost crops, lost spouses, or learned that 160 acres in an arid region was not enough land to support a family. The law's promise was democratic, but the land's judgment was not. The Homestead Act did not give families farms. It gave them a chance to build farms under a 5-year deadline, all while battling against weather, markets, loneliness, and death. For some, that chance became land held by descendants for generations. For others, it became a sod house returned to Prairie and a case file marked abandoned. The difference was rarely courage alone. It was rainfall, health, neighbors, money, timing, and the ability to survive one more season than the last disaster demanded. Which part of the 5-year test would have been hardest for your family? Building the home, breaking the land, surviving the weather, or enduring the isolation? Like, subscribe, and leave a comment, and we'll see you in the next one.